All right. Thank you all for sticking it out to the bitter end here. This is going to be a fascinating and informative session and panel. And to kick things off, I would like to turn it over to our friend and colleague with the Pacific Northwest Economic Region's Regional Infrastructure Accelerator, Bruce Agnew, to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Dave. Peter Scholz, I'll just give you a brief outline, then I'm going to put his comments into some context. Peter holds an MA in regional planning in Alberta, an MSc degree with metropolitan governance from Switzerland. He's been a professional transportation planner working in Washington, D.C., and a certificate from the University of Victoria in high-speed rail, which is particularly appropriate to us that live in the Cascadia corridor where high-speed rail is being studied. I got to know Peter through Penware when he was part of the Alaska to Alberta Railroad project, and he will go into greater detail on that. And Peter, in the process of working as a consultant for that team, he learned a lot about rail corridors. And then beyond that, in the last couple of years, he has expanded that Alaska to Alberta initiative, which he'll highlight this morning, to reach down into the U.S. And that's where we cross paths again, because at Penware, and just for those of you that weren't here when I spoke a couple of days ago, we are a public-private partnership that was formed in 1991. We have 5 Northwest states, including Montana, and 5 Western Canadian provinces and territories. Our program, called the Accelerator, is funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation Build America Bureau. Big Sky is Passenger Rail Authority is one of our programs or clients. We fund outreach for them, particularly along the Empire Builder Corridor and the North Coast Corridor. Dave and the team have been great partners the last couple of years. We've put in for some additional funding, and we hope to hear that result. And if so, we'll be doing even more outreach along the North Coast. I do want to plug a couple of things that are coming up relevant to Peter's discussion. As I referenced a couple of days ago, we are having a rail summit and a supply chain workshop in Portland, October 14th to the 16th. I believe Dan Bucks is going to be representing Big Sky and going to be giving us a larger group an update on this very successful conference. And we will be talking about, we'll be getting updates from other rail corridors, the Amtrak Cascades, the high-speed rail corridor, connecting BC, Washington, Oregon, Empire Builder, North Coast, and then the proposed renewal of the Pioneer train that you heard a little bit about from our Elaine at the Amtrak board, from Seattle, Portland down to Boise and Denver. So I encourage you to all join us then. You can join us remotely also if you can't make the trip to Portland. And then as we move this discussion now from east-west and looking at the Empire Builder North Coast and connecting Seattle and the Midwest, we're going to be focusing now on north-south. And I think it's also appropriate that we follow the discussion about the challenges that national parks face in the United States and in Canada, trying to get people through the park in something other than a single occupant vehicle. All the stories you heard in that graphic picture of the Madison Yellowstone backup is in spades in Canada, in Lake Louise, Banff, and Jasper. If you've been there, huge problem. Great opportunity for us to think about a combination of train, bus, autonomous vehicle. It's a project I worked on, and the technology is getting better every day. Combination of getting people through the parks and to the parks. So part of Peter's presentation is going to focus a little bit on national parks. I want to add some comments during that time because we have this concept called the Trail of the Grizzly that would connect Salt Lake and Banff through a series of existing rail lines and gateways to Tetons and Yellowstone and Glacier, as well as the Canadian National Parks. We can come back and we can discuss that. But it's part of Peter's larger vision of using rail to move people and goods between Alaska and the Arctic and the interior of the U.S. And it's really exciting. And I'm going to turn it over to you to start your PowerPoint.
Thanks very much for that, Bruce. I really want to thank Bruce and David for the very kind invitation to come down here and to meet in this beautiful station and this beautiful town, and appreciate American hospitality. It's been a few years since I've been to the U.S. Actually, no, I was in Alaska in November. I'm lying, but no. Been to Montana several times and toured around. Very pleased to be able to give this opportunity to give this this presentation. Just a little bit, I'll add. About 15, 20 odd years ago, I had this crazy idea about getting passenger plane service between Edmonton and Bozeman, so that Edmontonians could get down to Yellowstone and they could help complete the connect the Rockies to the Yellowstone as tourist attractions. It's actually really hard to get between Alberta and southern Montana. It's quite a long drive, and Edmonton's 4 hours from Jasper. So I was actually right. I mean, the hospitality of Montanans is amazing. A few texts, email, there was this before, a few emails, and I was sitting in the office of the Department of Transportation for the state of Montana and Helena talking about these ideas. There wasn't a lot of interest from the airline companies for a variety of reasons. I won't get into it, but it gave me a bit of exposure. And when I first got invited to do this presentation, I was like, there's not enough traffic. But now that I've been here and I understood the tourism flows on the larger scale, because I was just looking at very small scale Edmonton to Alberta, I do think I agree with Bruce, there's a real opportunity. I've been a rail buff for my whole life, and I was recruited in 2020 I was living in the Canadian Arctic to work on the Alaska to Alberta Railroad, to assist with railroad planning, community engagement, community economic development. And the company failed after a year, and I was laid off along with my entire team, holding my fourth daughter in my arms, who was then 2 weeks old at the time. Long story, but basically a couple of folks at the top were caught with their hands in the cookie jar, and Canadian Securities basically shut down the company. But once you got a taste of actually building a new railway, it sort of becomes part of your life. You can it's like a drug in a way. And so if
You're in rehab now.
yeah, no, I'm feeding the addiction, and you're enabling it. So. So this is an old version of my mental health exercise from 2022, where I wrote down the route planning ideas that I built up while I was working at Alaska to Alberta Railroad. This map is now seriously out of date because I put an extra 1,500 hours pro bono into defining routes, potential routes. But if you are interested in it, I have handouts here. You can take them or share them. My contact information is on them. This is like a very big business card in a way. With that, I will get into my presentation. It's in two sections. One is summarizing the Alberta Passenger Rail Master Plan, and then phase two is talking about where could we go from here, which Bruce will contribute to. And I'm going to rotate 45 degrees so I can keep an eye on the screen. The magic stick is not working. How do I make the magic stick work? Oh, okay. In another life, I could have been a cooler, because when I get next to close to technology, the technology fails. So I figure I should really work here for Bill Gates, because every time I go in front of anything by Bill Gates, it immediately crashes. Is it working? My magic continues. There we go. Okay. So to get ready for this presentation, it's going to be a bit of a hodgepodge of styles, and I'm getting a feedback from the laptop. The people. Okay, great. You're going to see a hodgepodge of a few different styles, because my first thing was to go to gamma.ai and say, give me a presentation. It gave me a presentation. You're going to see those styles. And the data was good. Then I went to the government of Alberta, both the info line and a few of the senior bureaucrats I know, and I said, can you give me the inside scoop? Because the first draft of the plan is going to be released in like a week. And they said, no. Here's our public information. It's everything else is under lock and key. Okay, I realize I'm talking to people about it, and you must be close to finalize. Nope, won't start. Okay. So I stole some graphics from the public websites, and then you're going to see a few of my slides, which I'm a little nervous to provide because some people don't like being critiqued, but I do have 3 critiques of the Alberta Passenger Rail Master Plan. Where is this coming from? The Premier is a railphile, Premier Danielle Smith. She owned a restaurant out of a converted rail car for a decade when she was in the political non-land. Long story on that, but she definitely is a railphile. She wants to see this happen. And Alberta is an island. It's best to think of it. It thinks like an island. It acts like an island. It has an island culture, even though it's in the prairies. And that's basically because it's an area of high density surrounded by not high density. Between Calgary and Edmonton right now, we've got 3.5-ish million people in this one corridor. And you have to go 800 kilometers in any direction to get to the next major population center or head north. There's a lot of empty up there. People say Montana's big. It is very big. I've been up there. It's bigger. It's very, very empty. Alberta is also a powerhouse. Here's a listing sorted by GDP in Canadian dollars. You'll see it's 3rd in the country, 4th in population, and our per capita income is a whopping 50% higher than Quebec. Alberta is the only province whose income is comparable to American incomes, even accounting for the fact the Canadian dollar is like worth about 14 cents right now. I'm exaggerating. It's 80 something. No, nope, sorry, it's 60 something. It's really low. So it is a powerhouse. It makes, on an annual basis, it contributes 25 billion more to the federal government than it receives in payments back. For 40 million people, that's a fair bit of money. So with that, we'll go into discussion of the Alberta Rail Master Plan. So right now, the population is exploding. The province gained 4.4% population last year. That's around 200,000 people. A lot of that is in migration. For the fact is, you can move from Ontario or Quebec to Alberta, and your income is basically going to jump by 20 to 30% right now, and real estate is cheaper, and cost of living is cheaper. It's a higher standard of living, and the culture. COVID played a big role in that. The COVID lockdowns in Canada were beyond anything California could have come up with. It was an extreme situation, speaking personally. And I was in Alberta. Like, I wasn't in a province where you were ordered to have your shots. So there's been a big migration of sort of libertarian-minded Canadians from other provinces into Alberta. That's part of the driver and part of the reason it happened right after Danielle Smith won the election, because she leans libertarian. So the government is forecasting an average growth rate of 1.3% per year for the next 25 years. There's more details in here, but basically in 2050, you're looking at almost 7 million people, which, it's a lot, but compared to Washington State or It's sort of on par with, say, Michigan or Ohio. It's big, but it's not massive it would make Alberta still the third largest province. It would overtake British Columbia because the other provinces, or Ontario and Quebec, are also growing. So the Premier's thinking, and I definitely agree with it, is if you've got 4.5 million people here and we've got 2 million people coming in, and the demographers for the government of Alberta are saying 86% of Alberta's population is going to, like, majority of that growth is going to be in that existing Calgary Edmonton corridor. So it's going to just pile in and pile in and pile in and pile in. You're creating a population core strong enough for a regular passenger service. And, instead of having a 10-lane freeway between Calgary and Edmonton, why don't we look at rail options and high-speed rail options, conventional rail options? So that's the overall thinking. Which brings me to my critique number one, is I think they're way too conservative. The compound per cap population growth rate of Alberta from 1960 to 2025 is 2.1%. They're saying it's going to be 1.3%, but they're not giving a real rationale why it's lower. They're the demographers for the government of Alberta. They're saying, I'll show you this. That gray line on the main graph is, in where it's blue, is the Alberta population growth rate from 2000 to the current day. And you see it wiggles a bit. And then you see what the big spike, that's the 4% from last year. And then you'll see the demographers, government of Alberta, are saying next year is going to be big, 2027 is going to be big, and then it's going to drop off. And it's going to stay around 1%. The only rationales they've given is that the birth rate is low and there's going to be tightening on immigration. And I'm going, that's way overly simplistic. Provinces have certain ability to control immigration rates within the Canadian Confederation, so Alberta might up that. But when you just look at the economic gravity and the better quality of life, I can't see why it's going to go from 2% to 1%. So, Peter speaking, it's going to be 10 million by 2050. Okay, so we're talking equal to Washington State, possibly overtaking Quebec as the second largest province. A very large gravity well. Take that or leave it. That's my critique number one. The overview of the plan. So they're focused on the Calgary-Edmonton corridor, of course, integration of tourism. For example, I live between Calgary and Banff, about halfway between the two, and I'm, as the crow flies, maybe a mile from the Trans-Canada Highway. I get to watch traffic. Saturday morning, every Saturday morning, it is a traffic jam going west. Every Sunday evening, it is a traffic jam going east back into Calgary. And when I mean like 4-lane freeway, like packed, moving. On a Canada Day long weekend or something like that, it gets nuts. And I get to see some pretty amazing accidents. I don't usually see the accidents. I see the smoke rising and then I see all the flashing lights. So the idea is, let's get a rail service from Calgary to Banff. And that totally makes sense, the amount of traffic there. How do you integrate tourism traffic, passenger traffic, et cetera? Regional extensions, they're looking at the smaller centers throughout Alberta, and then over the long-term cross-border linkages, such as into Montana. Now, what do you see 60-year, 30-year, 15-year? So they have a 60-year vision, and that's what it looks like. It's like, let's have really a lot of capacity between Calgary and Edmonton, and then we'll have these spur lines to other regional communities. And then how do we phase that based on 30-year network? And they're looking at, this is all obviously stolen from the government Alberta website. LRT, commuter rail services. LRT is, usually your last mile service, usually running up to about 40, 50 kilometers an hour. I should think in miles, okay, about 30 miles an hour. Commuter rail, generally running about 50 miles an hour, and regional rail can go or high-speed rail can go anywhere from 80 miles an hour up to 200 miles an hour. Depends on what you want to do. So they're saying, this is our future vision for 60 years. How do we get there in a 30-year increment? And then the plan which they're going to release is that empty blue box is what I was asking for. Can I have a foresight of what that's all about, which they wouldn't share. Critique number 2 is it's Peter speaking. The network is too predefined. Getting back to the population projections, I'm saying the population projections are too low. We've got 5 million Albertans now, more or less. We're adding another 5 million in 25 years. So you're adding, for every Albertan, there's going to be 2. Why do they all have to be in Calgary and Edmonton? The reason they're concentrating in Calgary and Edmonton is relating to the map on the screen. Now, when Alberta was founded, there were 5 cities founded because there are 5 passes through the Rockies that are suitable for rail. The Pine Pass for Grand Prairie, the Yellowhead Pass for Edmonton, the House Pass for Red Deer, the Kicking Horse Pass for Calgary, and the Crow's Nest Pass for Lethbridge. Each city is founded just inside the agrarian, where the soils are good enough to farm, adjacent to that pass. It's really that simple. 5 passes, 5 cities. The cities are located just as close to the pass as possible where the farmland is. Now, what you're looking at, this map was designed by Peter Lougheed, who was the premier, a very great premier 50 years ago, 1970s, when Alberta had under 1 million people. And Premier Lougheed said, we need to prepare for a province of 3 million people. We've discovered oil. Okay. So he said, the province owns most of the land. So let's release the agrarian land to the private sector so they can farm. And then we'll leave the non-agrarian land as crown control. What we call crown is like state lands. It's owned by the government for the most part, for the purpose of mining, forestry, And he says, everybody wants to have a cabin by the lake, but who can actually live in a cabin by the lake? Like, what are you going to do? Like, just fish all day? How are you going to earn your living? Fair enough. 1970s thinking. This is before Wi-Fi. Okay. Now Alberta, I look at these areas and they're big. Like you know Jasper and Banff. And that was the other thing, is he was like, why do we need more parks? Why do we need more recreation area? We also already have the enormous Banff National Park and an even bigger Jasper National Park. That's enough tourism to more than you can possibly imagine, right? Well, we're double what his plan was for. We're double the population what his plan was for now. So my argument is we have to actually step back a bit and go like, what do we want a province of 10 million people to look like? And why are we not re-examining the green-white boundary? The green zone is crown, the white land is private. Because there's all these places where you could put new communities, or places where people could live in a cabin by the lake, go fishing in the morning, and then work in the afternoon by what do they call it? Wi-Fi or satellite. Thank you. Starlink. That's it. Okay. So my argument boils down to, I feel like we're looking at a new foundation. We're adding another 5. We need to put a rail-based 5 million people on top of the road-based 5 million people we have. And let's look at different scenarios before we go into actual detailed rail planning. That's critique number 2. Economic impact of the passenger rail, very positive, very positive. Job creation, 15,000 plus construction jobs, 3,000 permanent positions for operations. I totally believe that. Tourism boost, oh yeah, big time. You land at YYC and you want to drive to Banff, it's gonna cost you, and good luck finding parking in Banff or Lake Louise. You can't drive to Lake Louise and park anymore. You have to book a bus at the ski resort 5 miles away, and you have to book 48 hours in advance, and you have to click right at 1 second after 8 a.m. and there's a 20% chance you'll actually get a spot you can park and take the bus in. And if you take the bus into Lake Louise, Parks Canada's got a 15-minute interval going up there, but only 1 hour interval coming back. So when you finish going to Lake Louise, whatever you're doing, you're going to have to wait an hour to get back to your car, to get on the bus to get back to your car. And if you got kids, like I got 5 kids now, like the transfer point of getting stuff from car into stuff on bus onto stuff, like This is a 45-minute process, guys. Okay, so when I want to go to Lake Louise, besides the driving time, I have to add on 2.5 hours of logistics just to get kids to lake and kids from lake. Why do people go to Lake Louise? Because it's amazing, right? It's a turquoise lake that's accessible by foot, and there's glaciers off in the distance. Like you can get to these places, but usually you have to hike for a couple of days. So it's worth it, but it's also, this could be rethought. Anyway, I've just taken up like basically pulling uphill the kids in the back. I use the old tram line that used to go from Lake Louise rail station up to the chateau to take the kids now. And the same situation. I just park miles away, and I have a system now where the bike is now my bus because I got so many kids. So the way they're evaluating, this is their matrix of evaluation of the different links they're possibly looking at. Going back to that map where you saw the blue map with all the arrows, this is how they're evaluating the links. So on the left side, they have all the different links that they're looking at, and then they have these strategic priorities that they're looking at. And I read them out. So the population served based on the 2085 forecast, which I've already talked about, employment served, connecting people to major job centers, airport connectivity, connecting to tourism destinations, tourism-oriented development potential, transit network connectivity, indigenous communities connectivity, reduced agricultural and sensitive land impacts. Meaning, is it eating up farmland? Canada's big. We do not have a lot of farmland. Okay, Americans have the only place that I find is like the United States in terms you just drive for days and it's just farm after farm after farm. The only place I've seen like that is basically Russia, where it's just that massive quantity of farmland. Canada does not have that, and it's not as high quality for the most part. So then, these are all given equal weight, and then they give a summary of how they're prioritizing their links, and then they use that, so they're doing combined with very intensive public consultations to develop their plan. So critique number 3 is to me, transit-oriented development should not be weighted equally. Transit-oriented development gives you the opportunity for value capture. Value capture is when the government comes to a place and it says, we want to put a new train service here. It's going to be frequent service. It's going to be high quality service. And it's going to upgrade your real estate values. And we want to upzone. But we want a piece of that money. So we're going to sell condos. We're going to sell real estate. There's going to be new businesses moving in. So what does a transit-oriented development look like? We're in one. Livingston is a transit-oriented development. Like, look at the beautiful buildings that are built. Look at this beautiful building, right? It's kind of instinctive when there's frequent, high-quality passenger service to a place then it's a sense it's going to be permanent. People will invest in that place because they have connectivity. It's like, so if you're turning a place like a depressed kind of local little town that, has one Chinese shop and, a hardware store that's been struggling along for 35 years, and you say, we're going to put a passenger service in, suddenly it's like, okay, somebody's thinking, I can buy a house at Edmonton and I have to drive 40 minutes to work 4 times a week, or take the LRT, which is full of persons of interesting persuasions. Or I can buy a house for half the price and just get on a train, which will take me right to downtown, half a mile to my office, or to my factory out in the suburbs for very low cost or minimal cost, much less than the cost of operating a car. Suddenly everybody's looking at these small towns, right? So this map I prepared a couple of years ago because I'm a rail geek and I spent 2 days working on this map. The base map is agricultural productivity. Pink, forget it, you're not growing anything. Yellow, you could possibly use for grazing cattle at low density. Blue, forget it. And then you get into oranges, and you can start growing things. And when you get into the dark oranges, which is the class 3B, you can grow stuff. You can grow corn, you can grow canola, that's good agricultural land. Notice what I said earlier, but why is Edmonton where it is? It's right inside that class 3 boundary. That's why it's there. Now, you see two lines inside the city of Edmonton. You see one little black circle, that's Edmonton in 1976. City boundaries 1976. The bigger line is the city of Edmonton 2024. That is all class 3 agricultural land. If you have a house in Edmonton, I have lived in Edmonton, you can grow anything. The soil is this black, rich stuff, and you have horrible winters. But once the spring finally comes, you can grow anything except strawberries because you do have occasional frost days in the middle of August, but you can grow anything. And that is food production that is being used up. So I just, for fun, made the red line, and I imagined a high-speed rail line going from Jasper to Edmonton with high-speed stations, 3 along the line, and then commuter rail stations. So I'm envisioning 250 kilometers an hour because one thing I learned at UIC in Paris is the fastest switch on the market is 250 kilometers an hour, which means you can have a train, the high-speed trains moving at 250 kilometers an hour, but they can share the track with a commuter line. The commuter line can go at a slower speed. Up to 250, those commuter trains can get off the main track, slow down and stop, and then go again, get up to speed, and then remerge back onto the main line. Once you're over 250 kilometers an hour, your high-speed line must be, there's no switches. It is a solid line. It's a separate, once you go over 250, you're in a different world of engineering. Concrete ties, secured passageway. That train is not slowing down that fast. It is not moving. It's not sharing the track. 250, you can't share the track, and that is where you can get commuter service combined with HSR tracks. So the critique is sort of twofold. Number one, well, threefold, is we need to have an understanding of this technology. So what it can be our effects on small communities. What is the TOD, value capture, transitory development potential in those communities? And how do we associate that with agricultural production and food security? Suddenly, I'm saying let's talk about food security when we're talking about train planning. Okay, where does that come from? Well, that's where this comes from. I ran the numbers for fun, and I said, okay, a commuter stop, let's say 5,000 to 10,000 people. HSR stop at St. Hinton and Stony Plain, 200,000 each. I know this area well. You can put 250, 300,000. There's plenty of space in these 3 cities. It's all forest land right now, most of that quarter. Add it all together, you end up around 500,000 and 750,000 people. That is basically extending Metro Edmonton out to Jasper Park boundary, and also giving you a tourism connection that's easy and convenient into Jasper. Jasper, unlike Banff, actually has space for growth, especially since a third of it burned to the ground last year, but that's another story. So if Edmonton is supposed to go from 1.5 million people to 3.5 million people, this is an example how train planning could say, let's take 500,000 to 750,000 people out of Edmonton proper and extend that metropolitan zone out 300 kilometers. And so the Edmonton itself goes from 1.5 to about 2.5, but the Edmonton region is still 3.5. See, that's the kind of scenario, kind of thinking that I really think that Albertans think when I'm saying, okay, we've got 5 million people in. As I said, 5 million people are moving in. Let's do a rail-based 5 million people on top of a car-based 5 million people, but we have to listen to people. We also have to think a little bit strategically and creatively, like Peter Lougheed did in the 1970s, because his plan worked and it's out of date. So we have to repeat that thinking. Beyond Alberta, yep, they're not looking. It's on the radar, but that's about as far as you're going to get is that graphic. So this is stolen from the province. So I'll wrap up the phase 1 of the presentation, and I'll get going on Trail to Grizzly. And probably easiest if I just do a quick run through, and then you can supplement where you wish. So the Trail of the Grizzly concept is Salt Lake City to Banff and possibly farther northern, which could be Rocky Mountaineer or other passenger services running north-south. This presentation will be available afterwards, I am told. This is a very quick map. This is not my best cartography, so don't hold that against me. On this map, the base map is stolen from openrailwaymap.org, which is generally very accurate. However, they completely forgot the line between Butte and Helena. I had to add that in myself. I use color matching so you can't tell, but take that. The source is not completely accurate. The Rocky Mountaineer, Canadian Rocky Mountaineer, they're most known for Vancouver to Banff and Jasper with a night in Kamloops. Kamloops is where the split occurs up there. And I don't believe it doesn't continue on into Edmonton. I've never seen a Rocky Mountaineer in Calgary, so I'm pretty sure it stops in Banff. I always see that they have their sighting in Banff, and they always stop there, and then they go bus tours after that. And as we all know, they've started a new tour from Moab to Denver now to extend it to Salt Lake City to Denver, and they're looking how to integrate their services. So here's Bruce's idea, which I think is a great idea. I've got two yellow lines on the map. The lighter yellow line is starting at Bozeman Airport, and it's going to Missoula, looking at Montana. It's sharing the big skyline, and then at Sandpoint, it's making a right turn, and it's going up the BNS, the UP spur up to Cranbrook and the Kootenay Valley. The Kootenay Valley is from Cranbrook up to Golden. Very beautiful valley. It's a pain to drive, especially in the wintertime. Lots of mountains, very beautiful. There's some tourism communities along it, like Radium Hot Springs, that aren't anywhere near as well known as Banff, but still very nice communities. The Banff Hot Springs are a tenth of the size of the Radium Hot Springs, and the Radium Hot Springs are a lot hotter. Actually, well, I personally never go to the Banff Hot Springs. I'll go to Radium. There it could integrate in some way with the existing Rocky Mountaineer plan. And then the Rocky Mountaineer occasionally will also run a line up through Prince George and down the Caribou Railway to Vancouver, which may not exist that much longer because 2 weeks ago, CN applied to shut down that whole line between Vancouver and Prince George. Sorry, 100 Mile House, keep the northern bit open, which I think would be a strategic devastation. The darker yellow line is going from Butte, Montana, down to Salt Lake City, where we connect the existing Canadian Rocky Mountaineer. Of interest as well, between Banff and Jasper, is the Icefields Parkway, which is a highway that everyone must drive once in their life, preferably slowly, and preferably go camping 2 or 3 nights along the way, because it is that spectacular. I'm not exaggerating. So that Icefields Parkway is integrated into the Rocky Mountaineer system, where they'll come into Banff. Some folks will be bussed up to Jasper, catch the other Rocky Mountaineer to come back down again. On the map, you'll see 2 purple lines. Those were identified in the 1920s as possible rail routes, so they are actually surveyed, which means I can say they can build a railway there. One is this diagonal from sort of near Red Deer up to Hinton, and that was designed to be mainly freight, to basically, because if you go up to Calgary to Edmonton, then you have to make the sharp right turn. So you get the Pythagorean theorem. It's shorter, just do a diagonal. If you're going from the US border north, that's what the bigger purple line is. And then there's Ashcroft to Clinton, which connects the may be defuncted Caribou line to the main lines. Quick side note, where you see this line heading down into Vancouver, where you see the B-Bar, Boston Bar subdivision, CN is on one side, CP is on the other side of the Fraser River. It's the Fraser Canyon. Both are cut in these ledges on the side of the rocky cliffs. And there's one point, so they have an agreement where the trains go up one side and they go down the other. But at one point in the canyon, they cross. So there's an X of bridges, rail bridges there. One stick of dynamite, and you've shut down Vancouver from the Canadian railway grid, period. Especially if you shut down the Caribou line. This is a little bit freaking out the federal government right now, because they're like, one landslide, one stick of dynamite, those bridges are out. Vancouver has no rail access. It's that significant. Canada is that vulnerable. And finally, I'll wrap up here. You see a little green line. It is topographically possible to go from Pincher Creek, Alberta, down to East Glacier, Montana. which would allow you to do a little loop around Waterton Glacier National Park. And I think about that and I go like, that would be really cool. That'd be really cool. I'm hoping to talk to the Blackfeet Nation later this afternoon about that. So there's 10 national parks in this. We got Jackson Hole, Yellowstone Glacier, the other glacier, Waterton, Revelstoke, Jasper, Kootenai, Yoho, and Banff on this loop. Would people want to see this? I think so. This is Bruce's idea. Great idea. Oh, there's the list. I just said it. North Cascades. Well, North Cascades is Seattle, but okay, fair enough. Sorry. What just happened? There we go. Oh, this list is not even accurate. That was the A that did that list. Should have caught that. So connections, we want to integrate with Amtrak. We want to integrate with the Rocky Mountaineer. We want to integrate with VIA, such as it is, with those services. This may be the time for my crazy idea. I do think that the Alaska connection, we should also talk about the Moose and Gator, should go from Miami to Anchorage and market it as a rite of passage for every American to see their whole country. I don't know. That's my crazy idea. And then I go to the Canadians and say, yeah, you're right. There's 400 million Americans that want to go from Anchorage to Florida and see their whole country in one giant train trip. And they're all going to be traveling through Canada and spending lots of money. Such terrible ideas. Well, anyway, benefits for Montana communities if we got these north-south tourism lines going. Economic revitalization, of course, tourism revenue, transportation choice, of course. These are the AI slides. You can tell because they have the funky graphics and all that kind of stuff. Amazing that you can produce graphics like this just with a few buttons. But anyway, so partnership, investment, and legacy would be the theme of this of the Trail of the Grizzly. And with that, I'll switch over to Bruce that was the last one to talk more about Trail of the Grizzly.
I'll just mention a couple things, of context for this. Rocky Mountaineer at our Spokane Rail Summit a year ago indicated that they want to expand their service in the U.S. They're Denver, Moab, Salt Lake. They see Salt Lake as a very important opportunity because you have more car rentals, more accommodations, a big airport that's growing, lots of intercontinental connections. And then they have this Canadian operation that is growing, and for the first time they're offering connections between Jasper and Banff Park because of the severe congestion and getting into those parks. So they were thinking out loud about how do we get our equipment from Salt Lake to Banff. And when you look on the map, and I don't have a map, but Union Pacific operates north from Salt Lake to Ogden to Pocatello to Idaho Falls to Rexburg on a sideline. And then I was talking to the national park folks about there used to be a rail spur into West Yellowstone. From Idaho Falls, you could get into Yellowstone.
I'm doing that.
From Idaho Falls, you can get into Tetons and you can get into, I guess it's a 2-hour bus ride to West Yellowstone. And given that picture of that fierce congestion and the fact that reference was made that you used to be able to take Union Pacific in the old days to get to Yellowstone. In fact, Sun Valley, Averill Harriman in the 1930s built this incredible rail line through southern Idaho to Southern California. And, movies and all kinds of great things happen. So you can get, and Dave and I have talked about how do we get people from Salt Lake to Butte, and that's on UP line. So obviously you engage in conversation with Union Pacific, what kind of improvements have to be made. Right now, it's a pretty well-run line that carries potash between Canada and Idaho. Companies like Simplot and Lamb Weston. And it also carries some coal. It's well maintained. And then from Butte, of course, you get into the Big Sky alignment. And I think it's no secret that Rocky Mountaineer is looking at possibly operating in Montana. They want to expand their U.S. operations. So that we've been kind of squiring them around to think about opportunities to connect Glacier and Yellowstone. And then once you get into Canada, as Peter said, you've got all kinds of opportunities with Via Rail and with what Alberta is doing to connect Banff to Calgary and Edmonton to Jasper. And you've got airport connections. You've got a whole bunch of really beautiful parks. And of course, this is the ecosystem of the grizzly bear from years ago. So it's a pretty exciting concept. Now, once you get to Salt Lake, all kinds of opportunities in terms of connecting national parks exist. There are 5 national parks in Utah, famous canyon lands and all that whole arc of national parks. There are 4 national parks in Colorado. So if you think about connecting the Zephyr in Salt Lake, and then of course Colorado has a very robust discussion about passenger rail, and so all of this stuff can be put together. One final note about what kind of train. Obviously, the North Coast and the Empire Builder and the Coast Starlight and the Pioneer are Amtrak long distance trains funded by the federal government, supported by local communities in the states. That's a business model, open to all, relatively inexpensive, very important, east-west. Then you get into high-end tourism trains, excursion trains, the intermodal connection possibilities with buses, et cetera. And then I'm glad that Alaska Railroad was mentioned because in my mind, it's an exciting hybrid. It runs from Denali, it runs from Fairbanks to Anchorage to Denali, and then down to Whittier and Seward, where it connects to cruise ship terminals. It has 3 lines. It's owned by the state. It gets a lot of federal grant money. It has 3 lines of revenue. 70% of its revenue comes from light freight. Remember on the other day, we talked about light freight, small packages on Amtrak. It's a good source of revenue for Alaska Railroad. Then they have local service. And if you've ever been on Alaska Railroad in the middle of winter, where there's a little cord you pull like on a bus, and the train stops, and these people get off with their backpacks, and they go off into the woods in snowshoes to their place. It's bizarre. It's like a movie, but it's local service. It is very important. And then from May to October, you put on some dome cars, and Norwegian Cruise Lines and others have these fabulous Denali adventures. So that could be a hybrid model for the Trail of the Grizzly in the future. But getting us all connected is part of our PNWR agenda, and we're hoping that we will continue this discussion in Edmonton where we have our summit. And so we'd like to work with you all and bring the Canadian folks that are interested in taking trains and buses to parks together with those in the Northwest and have a good conversation.
Thank you, Bruce. We do have time for a few questions. So any questions from folks either in the room or online? Any questions or comments? That was fantastic, Peter, and thank you, Bruce. Oh, we do have a taker.
Thank you, Peter and Bruce, for the presentation. I just want to note historically, there are some documents on this. When the draft of the national long distance Amtrak study came out from the FRA in draft form, they had 15 routes on it, and we all know what the report says. Big Sky Passenger Rail filed a set of comments on that. And those comments included the question of what happens after Salt Lake City, and proposed a parklands route within the United States with an option of connecting to Canada. And it basically was very similar to the Trail of the Grizzly, down to Salt Lake, then down through Utah and connecting with all of the national parks, the 5 national parks down there. It takes a little bit of time to get over into southeastern California, but back into Arizona, connecting Grand Canyon, the 5 southern Utah parks, Grand Canyon, and on down to Phoenix and Tucson. It was too late to get publicized, whatever, but there are documents filed on that in comments where we tried to enhance that particular idea as a long-term vision. Just wanted to note that, just so it isn't lost. Someday someone will pick it up and say, this is interesting.
Well, and
let me-
I think you're seeing that vision being picked up right now. And this is how ideas move from concept into reality. Bruce.
Well, Elaine Clegg has this vision on the Amtrak board now of what she calls the Desert Rose, which is basically Seattle, Portland, Columbia River Gorge, Boise, Salt Lake, and then southbound from Salt Lake to Las Vegas on UP's line, which would connect all the national parks there. And she calls it the Desert Rose, which I think is kind of a cool name. You've renamed the Hiawatha to the Big Sky North Coast. Why not rename the Pioneer to Desert Rose? Because it does fulfill that term. I think the compelling argument we can make too, and mention was made of Doug Bergram and North Dakota, another great partnership. I think the message we could take to the administration in Ottawa and Washington, D.C., and our members of Congress is we have to do something to relieve the traffic pressure at our national parks. And the rail lines exist. They can be upgraded at relatively inexpensive costs. But these national park budgets have been cut, and road maintenance is a challenge. We're going to be spending time in Yellowstone the next couple of days, and I worry about the traffic. And people want options. People want alternatives, and the park folks are brilliant. They're open to suggestions. But we got to work together on this and connecting something as exciting as the Trail of the Grizzly can unite imagination and make these kind of cross-border investments into the Rocky Mountains, into Alberta and British Columbia. And that's pretty exciting for an international tourist to be able to, maybe it's 2-week rail trip like you do in Europe, or the European Express, Orient Express. There's a market for that. And if we can get the accommodations at these small towns and the bus connections into the park and the reservation system all worked out, as Rocky Mountaineers have been able to do, we can have high-end tourism training, we can have local service, and we can have just people that want to fly into Salt Lake and get to national parks over a week by rail and bus. So.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay. We'll go to our friend in North Dakota and then come back over here.
Yes, in discussion with people in Jamestown, our tourism, it was brought up, and you know this already, but I don't know if anyone said it. International travelers, when they're coming here, they're not spending a couple days, they're spending a month, and they want to have access to rail because that's what they're used to. So that has to be a comment someplace in the discussion, that when we have international travelers, they're here for a month to do the traveling.
Yeah, and Rocky Mountaineer told us a couple of days ago that it's not Canadians on their trains. It's Australians and Swiss and Germans. So it would be a huge draw for tourism for all of our Intermountain region.
Hey, my name is Jesse Terry and I'm with Yellowstone Teton Clean Cities. I just had a general question. I could probably look it up myself, but is there a high-speed rail between Calgary and Edmonton?
There is no passenger service between Calgary and Edmonton.
That's surprising. I'm actually from Calgary originally, but that's an aside.
Thank you for that. Okay, going back over here.
And I want to give credit to the government of Alberta. It is a conservative government, and as Peter said, the premier is a huge rail fan. She's as passionate as Senator Sheehy was on the video yesterday. So having conservative, libertarian folks in positions of power in terms of policy and budget is a big deal.
Hi, my name is John McIntosh, Association or All Aboard Washington. I want to thank Peter and Bruce for hosting this panel. And I noticed, I was just looking on YouTube at the Kingsgate border crossing is a huge rail crossing on the former Spokane International, now it's Union Pacific. Nice piece of track. I mean, it would just be very perfect for passenger service from Spokane north. I'm curious, if you thought about routing it through Coots, through Lethbridge and Calgary and that way.
The Alberta Passenger Rail Master Plan is likely to have some strategy to include Lethbridge from Calgary. For passenger service, I could see like a business travel. There's not a lot of things, you know, that would draw tourism, honestly, between Lethbridge and Great Falls, and it's quite a long stretch. It's about 4-hour drive. I know, because I did it yesterday or 2 days ago, and you have to stay awake. I was pumped up on yerba. I think tourists, that's part of where where you're coming from. Part of where that idea for that line, a new line from Pincher Creek down to East Glacier, was to close that circle in a route that tourism's, people from around the world would be interested to see. But where I definitely think there can be optimization and should be optimization on the Coots line is freight. Because there's the fracking industry and other industries. The Canadian side and the American side aren't really talking to each other, to the best of my knowledge. And I've driven that route 20 times in my life. I've never seen a train on that track. And I don't know what the deal is, why, but but the inclination of CPKC now, especially that they purchased Kansas City, is they want to use their border crossings. So they're not directing their traffic down that way. They want to use their crossings, so they have about 3 of them out in North Dakota and Minnesota. And BNSF, I want to do more inquiry from their perspective. There is a BNSF folk that I've asked to communicate with after this presentation, so I could understand what they think of the Shelby to Coots connection.
Thank you, Peter. We do have a comment online.
Another brilliantly insightful comment from Kim Whittemore. Add a new 16th long-distance route to the proposed preferred routes to connect the metro areas of Portland, Seattle with Phoenix, Tucson, and a host of major national parks, monuments, and wilderness areas. The draft map of 15 new long-distance preferred routes presented by study consultants at the 3rd round of meetings creates a bold vision of a new national passenger rail network with one obvious omission.
Okay, and what's being referenced there is the Amtrak Daily Long Distance Service Study that rolled out in its report to FRA's, Federal Railroad Administration's report to Congress in January of this year, and there were 15 preferred routes identified. Many of us would like to see a mechanism that would allow for that document to be more of a living document and not this static thing. And I think what we've seen is a compelling case made either through what Kim's comments were or through what we're seeing on the screen here as far as a bold vision for potentially a 16th or even other long distance routes that are in a somewhat counterintuitive way. Sometimes a bolder, bigger vision actually has the capacity to gain momentum, whereas a more puny, anemic vision would not. Peter.
Since we're talking big vision, going back to the Moose and Gator, I could see this as phase 1 of Moose and Gator. So Miami going through the national parks in the US Southeast, possibly up to Kentucky to see mammoth. I don't know. You probably want to stay farther south along the Gulf Shore, going to El Paso, looking at Big Bend National Park, and then coming up through the Rockies, make it a national park route. If Amtrak is running that route, or, you could have different classes of service. Some people would want a hotel on rails. Other people would want more coach service or whatever. But this could be the northern limit of it at the present time. As you get up to Jasper, that's as far as you're going to get. And as we get something built to Alaska, then you extend. The tourism potential in some locations of the Canadian North are Tombstone National Park, Yukon River, Dawson City, McMillan Pass. No one's ever heard of McMillan Pass. You could easily, there's places in the Mackenzie Mountains you could go for 600 kilometers, and it's all alpine, it's all treeless, it's all Arctic, and it's cliffs and mountains and grizzly bears and mountain goats. There's literally no one living there. And if there's just a track going through, I'm like, that would be most amazing. But anyway, my last plug is, if you have a route going from Anchorage to Miami through all of these national parks, that would be the longest passenger rail service in the world, longer than the Trans-Siberian. But
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's give them a round of applause.